Brazil does not defeat criminal factions because they are in the government. I agree with you, Mr. Bukele. Most honorable president of this forum, Congressman Robert Pittenger, congressmen, ambassadors, delegate-in-chiefs, ladies and gentlemen. My name is Nikolas Ferreira. I'm a Christian and a father of 2 daughters, married, of course. Before coming the most voted congressman in Brazil, I was born and raised in a favela, and I saw up close how violence destroys a neighborhood, a city, a state, and now an entire country. And today I will speak without the filter that the media imposes. I will speak about the reality of my nation. Today in Brazil, there are 88 mapped criminal organizations operating from inside Brazilian prisons. Of these, 72 operate locally, 14 regionally, and 2 transnationally. More than half, 58%, have as their main activity the direct confrontation against the state. In other words, they no longer hide. They openly challenge the state. These factions impose rules, control territories, punish, charge taxes, and most seriously, they use terror as a form of government. 11% of the Brazilian population lives in territories under the direct influence of criminal factions. But the most alarming data comes from a study entitled Criminal Governance in Latin America. Between 50 and 60 million Brazilians, roughly 1/4 of the population, live under what is called criminal governments, an authoritarian and violent regime that decides who enters and who lives. In other words, 1/4 of the Brazilian population lives under a government that was not elected, does not provide accountability, and does not respect the Constitution or the law. The consequences are tragic and daily. In their own system of justice, the Red Command, one of the most notorious Brazilian factions, uses several methods of torture and execution to punish misconduct, eliminate rivals, and repress residents who oppose or report their activities. Torture sections are frequently recorded and circulated in messaging groups as a warning to the community. The newest method involves both torture and corpse disposal using alligators. Yes, ladies and gentlemen, alligators. Another consequence brought by criminal factions is the warlike atmosphere and the rise in deaths caused by stray bullets. According to the Crossfire Institute, the number of stray bullets victims in Rio de Janeiro grew up by 58% in the year 2025. In the first 75 days of this year, 41 people were struck compared to 26 in the same period the previous year. Innocent people, children, workers, fathers, die simply for being in the wrong place in the wrong country. And once again, I agree with President Bukele when he says that the first step to fixing a country is to bring peace. Because it's useless to have healthcare, education, and roads if you do not have security, and may end up being killed by a straight bullet on the way. And it gets worse. In the year 2024, Brazil recorded an increase of 33.8% in deaths of police officers. 170 officers were murdered, men and women who left home to protect society and returned in coffins draped with the national flag. Another 126 committed suicide, victims of psychological abandonment and the constant pressure of being treated as criminals for simply enforcing the law. But Brazil's tragedy goes beyond regional statistics. In just 2 years, there were 73,190 lives lost, all Brazilians murdered within their own territory. To give perspective, the Gaza Strip, the stage of a declared war between Israel and Hamas, 67,869 people were killed in 2 years of conflict. In other words, Brazil, with no civil war, foreign invasion, no missiles, no tanks, kills more than a war. As if the terrifying death toll were not enough, in Brazil the factions also spread terror by charging fees from small business owners just to allow a store to operate. There are reports of bar owners and street vendors executed for not paying extortion. They control telecommunications, transportation, security, food, water, and even the price of the cooking gas. It's a parallel state, totalitarian, armed, and unpunished. But the real scandal is this: such a parallel state only exists because the official state tolerates it and often funds it. Beyond extortion, factions expel families from their homes, leaving them homeless, and then rent these properties to finance the criminal organizations. In Fortaleza, capital of the state of Ceará, residents were expelled from their own homes in at least 49 neighborhoods. In 21 months, 219 expulsions were recorded, according to the Public Security Secretariat. To understand the severity of what's happening in Brazil, I will give you the example of PCC, the First Capital Command, one of the most powerful factions in Latin America. Founded in 1993 inside the São Paulo prison system, the PCC began as a leagued brotherhood of prisoners against state abuse. 30 years later, it has become a transnational criminal organization operating in 19 Brazilian states and with confirmed presence in Paraguay, Bolivia, and Colombia. Today, the PCC moves billions of reais per year with hierarchical structure, internal codes, its own tribunals, and the ability to corrupt public agents or infiltrate business activities such as gas stations. It is essentially a Brazilian cartel with business, logistics, and even legal branches. It was the PCC that carried out the first execution of a judicial authority by organized crime in Brazil, the judge Antônio José Machado Dias, murdered in March 2023 in Presidente Prudente, São Paulo. After that, many other judges and prosecutors were placed under threat. Another famous crime was the historic robbery of the central bank in 2005. They dug a tunnel of 80 meters to reach the vault in Fortaleza and stole approximately 165 million reais. Finally, another mega operation orchestrated by the PCC were coordinating attacks in São Paulo in 2006. In May, the PCC ordered bus burnings, police station attacks, prison riots, and the state capital was paralyzed. More than 59 securities agents were murdered, and the state declared a curfew. No one of this is a coincidence. Brazil's public safety, security tragedy is not only police-related, it's political. And it began more than 3 decades ago, when Lula and Fidel Castro founded the São Paulo Forum in 1990. That meeting brought together left-wing parties, revolutionary movements, and even armed organizations such as FARC. Its objective was clear: reorganize the Latin American left after the collapse of the Soviet Union, replacing the weapons of socialism with a new weapon, state power. But the project never abandoned its essence: ideological infiltration and tolerance toward crime. What used to be guerrillas are now factions. What used to be revolution is now institutional capture. And little by little, the Brazilian state became hostage to the delinquents it helped create. The Forum's project penetrate prisons, elections, and eventually the justice system. It is no surprise that more than 80% of provisional inmates voted for Lula in the first round. After his victory, videos emerged of prisoners celebrating inside their cells. They know exactly who defends the narrative of criminal victimhood and police demonization. When Congress proposed classifying criminal factions as terrorist organizations, Lula government opposed it. while other Latin countries adopted the classification to fight narco-terrorism. The cruelest proof came when 4 police officers were killed in mega operation in Rio de Janeiro. The entire country mourned, except the president. Lula offered no condolences to the families of the heroes, but was quick to mourn the death of the criminals. And here, as a Brazilian in El Salvador, I send a message to these 4 families that now is crying because they don't have their family anymore, they doesn't have their parents anymore, to say that these 4 police that were killed by the criminals, they are not the devil. It's the opposite. They are heroes. Not for Brazil, but I'm sure for you guys also, and to the whole world. And the problem goes far beyond public security. The Workers' Party built its political history on 2 of the greatest corruption scandals in the democracy West, the Mensalão and the Petrolão. The Mensalão bought votes in Congress, an assault on democracy. The Petrolão looted Petrobras, an assault on the nation. Together, they diverted billions of reais, financed campaigns, bought support, and created the largest corruption scheme ever uncovered in the Southern Hemisphere. And what happened afterward? The convicted were released, the trials annulled, and the same political group returned to power with the same speeches and the same methods. Today, when the government remains silent before the factions and the judiciary ignores traffickers, it is because all speak the same language, the language of impunity. And if the executive falls, the judiciary is even worse. The Supreme Court, which should protect the Constitution, has released traffickers and weakened law enforcement. Brazil's justice system insists on humanization formulas that in practice work as safe conduct for criminals. A clear example is the custody hearings introduced in 2015. By August of 2024, more than 1,700,000 such hearings has been held, with approximately 39.4% of those arrested in flagrant released at this initial stage. 4 in every 10 criminals caught in act walked freely, while the victims remain abandoned. The mega trafficker André do Rap was released by a Supreme Court decision and never returned to prison. In the last 7 years, more than 30 PCC leaders were released through the front door. Some judges even prohibited helicopters, police entry into favelas, and legitimate use of force under the argument of protecting human rights. Curiously, the human rights of victims are never remembered. In Brazil, there is no effective parliamentary oversight over the judiciary. The system of checks and balances simply does not exist. Congress cannot review judicial decisions that violate the constitutions, cannot summon a Supreme Court justice to provide explanation, and has no effective accountability mechanism except impeachment, which is politically impossible. In the year 2020, an action in the Supreme Court, filled by an extreme left party, imposed severe restrictions on police operations in Rio de Janeiro communities. Police were basically prevented from combating crime unless they obtain extremely bureaucratic authorization. The decision was presented as a way to protect lives, but in practice left the citizen unprotected. By drastically limiting police action, prohibiting operation, demanding exceptional justification, and bureaucratizing every step, the decision created the perfect environment for organized crime to reorganize, strengthen, and expand its territorial power. While the state was held hostage by legal orders, criminals filled this vacuum, expanding weapons arsenals, drug routes, bases of operation at their territories control. This is the result of government of judges, a system where 11 unelected ministers decide not only to interpret the law, but the country's agenda itself. They choose which cases move forward, which investigations are buried, and even which words may or may not be spoken online. For just an example, if I say here today that Mr. Alexandre de Moraes, our Supreme Court judge in Brazil, he is a tyranny, when I come back to Brazil, maybe I can be in jail. Just to know, President of the Parliament, how it works in Brazil. A system, they choose which cases move forward, as I said, and we are living under a new kind of censorship in rubes. Brazil must restore balance among the powers. This is not about attacking the judiciary. It's about rebuilding constitutional harmony. We need accountability mechanism, limits, reviews, transparency. Democracy is only healthy when power is divided and supervised. Without control, power becomes corruption. El Salvador teaches us that political courage and moral leadership can transform a nation. But courage is not only about confronting crime in the streets. It's also about confronting the structures that protect crime in the courts. Brazil does not need more laws. It needs justice that obeys the law. It does not need more speeches about democracy. It needs institutions that respect democracy. As long as Parliament is mute and the judiciary untouchable, corruption will remain unpunished, factions will continue to govern, and the Brazilian people will remain victims of a state afraid to act. May this meeting in El Salvador inspire a new era, an era which Parliament rebalances power, returns to the Constitution, and the people believe once again that the law applies to everyone, includes who interprets it. Que Dios bendiga a todos.
Thank you very much for those refreshing insights. It really resonated with me. You got my vote. And give a plaque for you. Thank you again.
Gostou? Então comenta aí. Não gostou? Comenta também. E claro, inscreva-se no Olha Isso, curta e ative o sininho.